What's up, you guys? And today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be cooking a bread pudding recipe from the first American cookbook that was published. And it was published by Amelia Simmons back in 1796. Now, to start off with any good bread pudding, we got to start off with the bread. Now here I'm going to use actually a sourdough loaf that I made myself. It's not the prettiest loaf, but it is a sourdough loaf, so it is going to be probably more in tune to what they used back in the day. And a sourdough loaf pretty much is just a loaf that's naturally leavened with a starter culture. And I'll definitely make a video in the future on how to make a sourdough bread loaf. And now we're going to take that pound of bread and we're going to let it soak in a quart of milk for about 35 minutes or until it's nicely soaked up and absorbed all of the milk. And one of the more interesting features of this recipe is it's calling for soft bread. Now whenever I've made bread pudding in the past, usually recipes will call for stale bread or just bread that's been left out to stale up. That of course helps the bread absorb more liquid, but of course staying true to the recipe we'll use the soft bread. And here I am, I'm just going to be mixing together my pound of sugar and my 7 eggs. Well, the recipe calls for 7 eggs, but in my research I found that eggs were a lot smaller back in the day, so I'm actually only using 6 here. And now I'm going to add in my heavy cream and make sure that's mixed in well as our butter. And we're just combining all of the wet ingredients here. Now the recipe doesn't call for a specific amount of nutmeg or cinnamon, so I'm just going to eyeball it. And that just seems like about enough. And up next I'm actually going to be using a very special ingredient here called rofe-water. Now the reason it's calling for rose water and not something like vanilla extract is because vanilla extract at the time wasn't really well known. Humans didn't really know how to cultivate the vanilla bean in a commercial scale yet, so it was just a very expensive ingredient that no one really used. And it wasn't actually until 1841 that humans first found out how to pollinate the vanilla bean and grow it on a mass scale. So until then, you just see them using things like rose water or orange water, which is just rose petals distilled in water. Now the recipe also calls for me to pass the soaked bread mixture through a sieve. And this I thought was very strange, but of course in staying true to the recipe I tried my best, but unfortunately it just wasn't happening. So instead I just decided to try to pass it through a food processor. And after blending it up for a few minutes, you end up with a oatmeal type of consistency, an oatmeal or porridge type of consistency. Definitely not the prettiest looking stuff so far. Oh, and I should mention that the recipe called for a gill of rose water, and in my research a US gill, which is different from an imperial gill, is about half a cup. And now I'm just going to add my bread mixture to the custard mixture that I made, and oh my god, almost lost the spoon there. And after mixing together our custard and bread mixture, it's time to bake this thing. And in a large baking dish we're going to butter the inside, this of course to make it non-stick. And once it's been well greased, I'm going to pour in our bread mixture and custard mixture, and then I'm going to sprinkle the top with raisins. The reason I didn't add them in before is because, well, if I did, they would just sink to the bottom. And after about an hour, you get a very nicely baked bread pudding. Now the recipe called to bake it in a middling oven, and in my research that's about 350 degrees. And after letting it cool and cutting into it, I will say the smells coming from this are really interesting. You got the nice cinnamon smell, but you also have the smell of rose water, which is almost like this perfumey kind of a rose smell, which is really interesting. And I just topped it with a butter rum sauce and some whipped cream and powdered sugar. And after taste testing it, I will say it does taste pretty good. The rose water definitely is an interesting ingredient that I'm probably going to experiment more with in the future because it definitely really is a pretty wicked taste. And hopefully I did this recipe some justice. I know it was a bit of a strange one, but it was certainly really interesting to dive back into the past and look at these older recipes. But if you like this, please follow me on Instagram, like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for some future recipes. Peace.